The forming floor had never been this quiet. For 30 years, the plant had run 3 shifts a day, and the sound of it was the sound of the town itself. The low roar of the furnace, the rhythmic gasp of the forming machines, each one breathing out a fresh bottle every 2 seconds, the clatter of glass moving down the conveyor toward the annealing layer. People who lived nearby said they slept better with a hum in the walls, the way you sleep better beside a river. On this Friday night, at 9 o'clock, there was no hum. The IS machines stood cold and open, their molds empty. A red alarm blinked on the four-hearth panel, patient and unanswered. Down at the cold end, a pallet of bottles waited by the dumpster, every one of them cracked or clouded or warped. A full night's work fit only for the scrap heap. The air still smelled of hot glass, but the heat was going out of the building, and everyone standing on the floor could feel it. Warren Ashby stood in the middle of it all with a phone in his hand that he did not want to use. He was 66 years old, and he had owned this plant for most of his life, and he had never once seen the line stop for a reason he could not name. He looked at the dead machines like a man looking at a heart monitor that had gone flat. "Somebody tell me how to start it again," he said. Nobody answered. The skeleton crew looked at their boots. Dennis Kroll, the plant manager, opened his mouth and closed it. 9 days earlier, this floor had made 300,000 bottles without a single reject. Tonight, it could not make one. Claire Tennant, the operations director, finally spoke. She had been saying the same thing all week, and she was tired of being right. "There's one person who can," she said. "You fired him on Monday. Before you keep going, ask yourself who they call when the machine that nobody understands finally goes quiet. Some answers are standing in a kitchen across town, packing a lunch for tomorrow. Stay with this one to the end." 2 weeks earlier, on a bright Monday morning, Marcus Doyle still had a badge that opened every door in the building, and he had no idea that either of those things was about to change. Marcus was 38, and he woke at 4:30 every morning without an alarm. The house was small, and it was quiet at that hour, and he moved through it the way he moved through the plant, gently, knowing where everything was in the dark. He made 2 lunches at the counter. One was his, a thermos of coffee and a sandwich. The other was for a boy who was particular about his crusts. He cut the bread the way Eli liked and wrote a note on a paper napkin, the same as he did every day, 3 or 4 words, whatever came to him. Today it said, "You are braver than you think." Eli was 8. He came down the stairs at 6, with his hair pointing in 4 directions, and he ate his cereal with the seriousness of a much older man. "Dad," he said, "are you the boss of the glass?" Marcus smiled into his coffee. "No, bud, I'm not the boss of anything. I just keep it honest." "What does that mean?" "It means the glass wants to do the right thing, and my job is to help it." Eli thought about that, nodded once as if it settled a private question, and went back to his cereal. Marcus dropped him at his aunt's house, kissed the top of his head, and drove the 11 minutes to the plant with the windows down and the radio low. He was on the floor by 6, an hour before his shift needed him to be, because that was when the machines told the truth. The forming floor was the beating middle of the whole operation. Molten glass came out of the furnace at nearly 2,000 degrees, was cut into glowing lumps called gobs, and dropped into the forming machines, where molds shaped each one into a bottle in the time it takes to blink twice. Everything about it was violent and precise at once. A hair of difference in temperature, in timing, in the weight of a gob, and a bottle came out thin or crooked or full of tiny bubbles the men called seeds. The line ran on tolerances finer than most people would believe. Marcus walked it the way a farmer walks a field. He put his hand near a mold without touching it and felt the heat come off it. He listened. Machine 4 was running a little flat, a note under the others that only he seemed to hear, and he crouched at the shear mechanism and adjusted the timing by a fraction, and the note came back up into the chord. He swabbed a mold that had gone dry. He caught a gob weight, beginning to drift, corrected the feeder, and fixed a problem the cold end would not have seen for another hour, by which point it would have cost them 1,000 bottles. He had never read any of this in a manual. There was no manual. He had learned it the way you learn a language, by living inside it for 18 years, until it stopped being knowledge and became a kind of instinct in his hands. There was a story on the floor that people still told about Marcus from 3 winters back. The furnace had thrown a cold spot no gauge had caught, a slow drift in one corner of the tank that would have sent a bad pull straight into the machines and cracked 100 molds before anyone in the office knew a thing was wrong. Marcus had felt it in the color of the glass, not measured it, felt it the way you feel a fever on a child's forehead with the back of your hand, and he had pulled 2 sections and retrimmed the forehearth and saved the plant a week of downtime and $250,000. And then he had gone home and made spaghetti and never mentioned it to anyone who wore a tie. The men who were there that night did not forget it. It was the kind of thing that made a crew follow a man, not because he was loud, but because he had stood between them and disaster and asked for nothing. Ray Okonkwo found him there, with the swab still in his grip. Ray was 58 and had been on the floor even longer than Marcus, and the two of them had an understanding that did not need many words. Machine 4 was singing flat again, Ray said. You already fixed it, didn't you? She just needed a little attention. That's the whole job, isn't it? Ray handed him a coffee. A little attention before anybody notices it's needed. The line hummed at pitch. Marcus finally drank his coffee. It was, by every measure that mattered to him, a good morning. He had not always stood at the center of the floor. He had started at the very bottom of it. In 2008, when he was 20, Marcus had swept the cold end for a living. He pushed a broom through broken glass and asked questions that annoyed people, and most of them ignored him. One old forming man did not. He was near the end of his own long career, and he took Marcus under his wing for reasons he never fully explained, and he taught him that the furnace would teach him more than any school ever could if he was humble enough to sit down and listen to it. The glass doesn't lie, the old man told him. People lie. Machines lie sometimes. Glass never does. If it comes out wrong, it's telling you something true about what you did. Learn to hear it, and you'll never be out of work. Marcus had believed him, and he had spent the next years proving it right. He met Beth in 2014 at a county fair over a game he was too proud to admit he had lost. She had a laugh that carried, and she was not impressed by him, which impressed him enormously. They married in 2016. Eli came in 2018, red and furious and perfect. For 2 years, the small house was full, and Marcus thought that was simply how life would go from then on. In 2020, Beth got sick. It moved fast, faster than the doctors expected. and by the time the leaves turned, she was gone. And Marcus was a widower with a 2-year-old and a job that started before dawn. He almost quit. He stood in the parking lot one morning and could not remember how to make his legs walk toward the door. He did not have to quit in the end, because the crew would not let him. For a solid month, without being asked and without making a show of it, the other men on the floor quietly covered the hours he could not carry. Somebody always took his machine. Somebody always clocked the overtime and waved off the thanks. Ray drove Eli to daycare twice a week for half a year and pretended it was on his way, which it was not. Grief did not make Marcus bitter. He had watched it turn other men hard, but it did something else to him. It made him careful with people, the same way he was careful with heat and glass, because he had learned how quickly a thing you loved could crack if you stopped paying attention. "I don't know how to do this alone," he told Ray once, in the worst of it. "You won't have to," Ray said. And that had turned out to be the truest thing anyone said to him that year. There were harder nights than anyone at the plant saw. There were mornings Marcus stood at the sink at 4:30 and let himself miss Beth for exactly the length of 1 cup of coffee, and then washed the cup and went to wake his son. He kept her photograph on the refrigerator where the boy would grow up seeing her face. He learned to braid hair from a video, badly at first, and then less badly. He went to every parent night, still smelling faintly of hot glass, and sat in the small chairs and listened to teachers describe a serious, gentle boy who worried about other kids getting left out. He was raising Eli the way he tended the line, with steady attention and no shortcuts, believing that what you tend carefully does not break. At night, when the house was quiet again, Marcus would sit on the edge of Eli's bed and tell him that some things do not break if you tend them. He was talking about the boy. He was talking about the glass. He was talking mostly to himself. The trouble came from a direction Marcus never watched, because it came from above. The board had been leaning on Warren Ashby to cut costs. Every quarter the pressure grew, and Warren, who was a good man but a tired one, began to look for a way to show the numbers he needed to show. That was when his nephew arrived. Trevor Ashby was 32 and had an MBA and a way of speaking that made simple things sound like discoveries. He had never worked a floor in his life. Warren gave him a title that had not existed the week before, Director of Operational Excellence, and an office with a glass wall that looked down over the forming line like a viewing gallery. Trevor looked at the plant and saw a spreadsheet. He saw labor lines and reject rates and a senior forming lead who cost more than the men around him. He did not see why. He called a meeting in the glass office, and Claire Tennant told him the truth to his face. "The book doesn't run this furnace," she said. "Marcus does. He reads it. You can't automate a man's ear." "Then we have a documentation problem, not a Marcus problem," Trevor said, and he wrote something on his tablet, pleased with the phrase. Dennis Kroll, who should have backed Claire and did not, studied the table. Later, Trevor stood at the rail of his glass office and watched Marcus make an adjustment down on the floor, reach into a running machine, and change something, and watched the output on the cold end monitor tick back toward perfect. He could not see what Marcus had done. There was no line item for it, and because Trevor could not measure it, he decided it could not be real. He decided that Marcus was hoarding, making himself important, keeping the secrets of the line locked in his own 2 hands so that no one could replace him. He went down to the floor and asked about it, and his voice had an edge under the politeness. "If it's so important," Trevor said, Why isn't it written down in a procedure anywhere? Marcus wiped his hands on a rag and considered the younger man honestly. Because some of it lives in your hands, not on paper, he said. I can teach it. It takes months, I've offered. Marcus tried one more time, a few days before the end, because he could feel a bad pull coming the way an old sailor feels weather. He caught Trevor in the corridor and kept his voice even and reasonable. There's a change coming in the furnace, Marcus said. Maybe 10 days out. The batch has been running a little wet, and the tank's going to want retrimming when it hits. Whoever's on the floor needs to know what to look for, or you'll lose a whole night before the cold end even flags it. Let me show 2 of the younger guys. It won't cost you anything but my time, and I've got the time now. Trevor heard a man trying to make himself indispensable. That was the only story his training had given him for a moment like this. I appreciate the concern, Trevor said, in a tone that appreciated nothing. But the whole point of the new system is that it doesn't depend on any one person's, let's call it, intuition. If the process is sound, the process holds. That's what excellence is. Glass doesn't care what we call it, Marcus said quietly. It only does what the heat tells it. Trevor smiled. The way people smile when they have already stopped listening. That night he circled Marcus's name on an org chart and drew a line through it. He could have done it quietly. That was the part that stayed with people afterward. He could have moved Marcus, or offered a package, or simply let the contract lapse. Instead, Trevor chose to do it as a demonstration, to prove a thesis, and he chose to do it where everyone could see. On Monday morning, he called Marcus into the glass office. Dennis stood by the wall. Through the glass, the whole forming crew could see them, could see Marcus standing and Trevor sitting, could see the cardboard box already waiting on the desk. We're modernizing, Trevor said. We won't be needing you. He slid the box across the desk. It was the kind of thing a person practices. Marcus did not sit down. He looked at the box for a moment, and then he looked at Trevor, and there was no anger in his face, which somehow made it worse for the 2 men watching. Give me a week, Marcus said. Just a week. Let me walk somebody through the furnace before I go. She's got a pull coming that she doesn't like. If nobody's ready for it, you'll lose a lot of glass. The system doesn't need a week, Trevor said. The system is the point. Marcus nodded slowly. He picked up the box. He took his badge off the lanyard around his neck, the badge that opened every door in the building, and he set it down gently on the desk so that it did not make a sound. He walked out through the floor, past the machines he had tended for 18 years, and the crew stood up. Not in protest. They knew that would cost them. But they stood, one after another, and a few of them reached out and put a hand on his shoulder as he passed. Ray walked him all the way to the door. Claire came out of her office and stood at the rail and watched, and her jaw was tight. In the parking lot, Marcus loaded the box into his truck. He sat for a second with his hands on the wheel. Then he checked his watch, because Eli's bus came at 3:15, and if he left now, he would be standing at the end of the driveway when it did, and that mattered more than being right. He did not slam the door. He drove home the speed limit the whole way. He had a son who would be watching his face when he walked in, and he was not going to let a man like Trevor Ashby decide what that face would look like. Eli was surprised to see the truck. "Are you sick?" "Nope," Marcus said. "Long weekend, bud. Real long one. You want to get pizza?" Eli did want to get pizza. For a few hours, it was the best afternoon they had had in months. On Tuesday, Marcus made a decision, and it was the kind of decision that does not look like anything from the outside. He decided he would not sabotage. He would not gloat if things went badly, and he would not go begging if they went well. He would not call the local paper or post anything or say a bitter word about the family that had just put his life's work in a cardboard box. He had a boy watching how a good man behaves when he has been treated badly, and that was a more important classroom than the plant floor. But he also decided something else. He sat at his kitchen table with a legal pad, and he wrote out, by hand, several pages of the things that could not be put into a procedure. The feel of a furnace about to pull, the flat note in machine 4, when to swab by the run of the glass and not by the timer on the wall. Then he folded the pages and mailed them, not to Trevor, not to Dennis, not to management. He mailed them to Ray Okonkwo's home address because the crew were his people even when the company was not. And if the line was going to struggle, he wanted the men on the floor to have a fighting chance. That night, Claire called him. She was not supposed to, and she did it anyway. "It's already going sideways," she said. "The tuning software can't hold it. Rejects are up. Trevor's telling everyone it's a transition curve." "I'm sorry to hear it," Marcus said, and he meant it. Claire was quiet a moment. "You could let it burn, you know? Nobody would blame you. Part of me wants to watch it burn." "There are 40 families on that floor," Marcus said. "Ray's one of them. I'm not built to want that. And I don't want Eli growing up thinking that's how you win." He heard her exhale on the other end, something between frustration and respect. "You're a hard man to stay angry on behalf of," she said. He turned his phone off after that so he could read to his son without it buzzing, and the pages were already in the mail, and there was nothing left for him to do but be a father. Without Marcus, the line drifted, and it drifted fast. It started small, the way these things do. On Wednesday, the gobweights began to wander. A gram here, a gram there, and the automated system corrected for the number without understanding the cause. And so it chased the problem in circles. Seeds bloomed in the glass, tiny bubbles that turned a clear bottle cloudy. Checks appeared, hairline cracks born in the cooling. The annealing layer, which relieves the stress in the glass as it cools, ran uneven because no one had trimmed it to the day's conditions, and bottles came out the far end carrying tension that would shatter them later, in a truck, in a warehouse, in a customer's hand. The reject rate, which under Marcus had lived near zero, climbed to 5% by Wednesday afternoon. By Thursday, it was 15. The cold end inspectors could not pull the bad glass fast enough, and good product and bad product began to mix, which is the nightmare of any glass plant, because a single bottle that fails in the field can cost a contract. The machines had not been running themselves. They had been running on one man's attention, and now the attention was gone, and the glass, which never lies, was telling everyone exactly what they had done. Claire Tennant spent those days trying to hold the wreckage together with her bare hands. She pulled the best of the remaining operators onto the worst machines. She personally walked pallets back from shipping when she did not trust them, taking the short-term hit to protect the contract, and got overruled by Trevor, who wanted the shipping numbers to look like a transition and not a collapse. She stayed until midnight 2 nights running and came in before 6. And she watched the reject bins fill, and she kept a running note on her phone of every hour Marcus's warning would have saved because she suspected correctly that someone would eventually need to be shown the arithmetic in plain numbers. "You know what he asked for," she said to Dennis on Thursday, low so the floor would not hear. 1 week. To teach the furnace. We spent more than that in scrap by Wednesday lunch. Dennis did not answer. He had signed the paper too, and they both knew it. The younger operators tried. That was the part that hurt to watch. They were good men, and they wanted to save it, and they crowded around the panels reading numbers off screens. But the numbers were the shadow of the problem and not the problem itself. One of them, a kid named Petey, who Marcus had been quietly training, actually pulled a page from his pocket, one of the pages Ray had shared from the letter, and got Machine 4 singing right for almost an hour before the furnace drift swamped his fix. It was not enough. One man's notes in another man's hands were not the same as the man himself standing on the floor, listening. Dennis Kroll walked the floor Thursday night with a clipboard he did not know how to read. "We're scrapping faster than we're shipping," he said, to no one in particular. Trevor stayed in the glass office and talked about transition curves and change management, and adjusted numbers in a model, and the model did not care that the model was wrong. By Friday, the biggest customer, a beverage company whose order kept 2 of the 3 shifts employed, called to say the last 3 pallets had failed inspection and the contract was under review. And then, late Friday, the 4-hearth alarm went red and stayed red. And there was no one on the floor who could tell the difference between a real emergency and a false one. And so they did the only safe thing. They shut the line down. The furnace still glowed, because you cannot turn a glass furnace off, but the forming line went dark, and the plant that had run for 30 years stood silent for the first time in living memory. Which is where Warren Ashby found himself at 9 o'clock that night, standing over a phone he did not want to use, asking the empty air how to start his own plant again. "Who kept this running?" he asked. And it was not really a question, because he already knew. "The man your nephew fired on Monday," Claire said. "The one who asked for a week to teach somebody the furnace. You paid him to leave and threw away the week for free." Warren looked at the dead machines a long time. He was an old man, and he had made a bad decision, and he was not too proud to know it. He took out his phone and found a number he had known for 18 years and had never once had to dial himself. Across town, at a kitchen table, with his son asleep down the hall and a drawing of a furnace on the refrigerator, Marcus Doyle watched his phone light up with a name he had not expected to see again so soon. He let it ring twice. Then he answered. "Marcus," Warren said, and his voice was not the voice of a chairman. It was the voice of a tired man who had run out of other options. "It's Warren Ashby. I'm going to say the hardest word I know how to say. Please, come back." Marcus came back on Saturday morning, and he did not come back to gloat. He came back because Ray called him right after Warren did and said the crew was scared and the furnace was in trouble, and would he please just come look. That was the sentence that moved him, not the chairman's apology. Ray saying the crew was scared. He walked onto the floor at 7 with a travel mug in his hand like it was any other morning. And the crew's faces changed the moment they saw him. He did not make a speech. He set his mug on the rail, put a hand near the forehearth, listened to the furnace for a long moment with his eyes half closed, and started giving quiet instructions. "She's not broken," he said. "She's just been left alone too long. Ray, Pull the timing on section 4 back to where I sent you. Somebody get me the gob weights from the last good run. Not the model, the real ones off the sheet. We're going to bring her up slow." They worked all day. Marcus read the furnace pull the way he had promised he would if only they had given him the week, and he tuned the machines by hand and by ear, one section at a time, coaxing them back into the cord. He did not rush it. You can't rush glass. He brought the forehearth back to trim first, because everything downstream is a lie until the heat coming in is honest, and he stood over that panel for 2 hours making changes so small that Trevor, watching from above, could not see that anything was happening at all. Then the gob weights off the real sheet from the last good run, not the model. Then the timing on each machine, section by section, until the flat note in machine 4 rose back into the cord and the whole floor began, slowly, to sound like itself again. Petey stayed at his elbow the entire day, and this time Marcus was not going anywhere. And so the boy learned more in one Saturday than a manual could have taught him in a year. That was the thing Trevor had never understood. The knowledge was not being hoarded. It had only ever been waiting for someone willing to stand still long enough to receive it. Ray had the mailed pages in his back pocket, worn soft from reading, and between the two of them, the line came alive an inch at a time. By afternoon, the machines were breathing again. By evening, the first clean bottle in 3 days rolled off the end warm and whole and clear, and a couple of the younger guys actually cheered and then looked embarrassed about it. Trevor stood at the rail of his glass office and watched the whole thing, and for the first time in his life, he had nothing to write down. He came down to the floor near the end of the day. To his credit, he came down. He stood a few feet from Marcus and watched him finish an adjustment, and he said the only honest thing he had said all week. "I don't know what you just did," Trevor said. Marcus did not look up from the machine. "I know," he said. "There was no cruelty in it. That's the part that isn't on paper. That's the part I offered to teach you before you decided it wasn't real." "For what it's worth," Trevor said, and stopped, because he was not sure what it was worth. "I read your file. There's nothing in it that says any of this. 18 years and the file just says forming lead." "Files are for the parts you can write down," Marcus said. He set his wrench on the rail and finally looked at the younger man straight on. "You wanted a procedure. Here's the only one that matters. You show up before you have to. You listen longer than you talk. You treat the thing you're responsible for like it can feel you paying attention, because in a way, it can. Do that for 18 years, and you'll have a file nobody can read either." He picked the wrench back up. "It's not a secret, it's just slow. That's why people skip it." Trevor did not have an answer for that. For the first time all week, he did not reach for one. Dennis Kroll found he had a great deal to be quiet about. Warren stood at the back of the floor with his hands in his pockets and watched a man he had underpaid for years save the thing his family had spent a fortune trying to make run without him. He was doing arithmetic in his head, the kind an owner does at the end of a very expensive lesson, and every number in it had the same name. Sunday came, and Marcus was so tired he could feel it in his teeth, but the line was holding, and that was enough. He was in the empty break room at dawn, waiting on a pot of coffee, when Claire came in. She had not gone home either. "You fought for me all week," Marcus said. "It was not a question. I kept telling them your name like it was the answer To everything, Claire said. She poured herself a cup and did not quite look at him. Turns out I was right. It got a little annoying, being that right, for that long, to people who wouldn't listen. Turns out it was just the answer to a furnace, Marcus said. No. She looked at him then. It was the answer to a lot of things. The furnace was just the loudest one. Can I ask you something? Claire said. All week, you had every reason to let it fail. It would have proved your point louder than saving it ever could. Why didn't you? Marcus thought about it, because she deserved a real answer and not a modest one. When Beth got sick, he said slowly, the whole floor covered for me. A month of shifts. Nobody kept a ledger. Ray drove my kid to daycare and lied about the route so I wouldn't feel like I owed him. He turned the coffee cup in his hands. You don't pay that kind of thing back to the people who gave it to you. They don't want it back. You just carry it forward and hand it to whoever needs it next. This week, that was 40 families who never did anything to me. Letting it burn to make Trevor look small would have meant burning them too. I wasn't going to teach my son. That's how a man wins. Claire was quiet for a while. Eli's lucky, she said. Other way around, Marcus said. I'm the lucky one. He just hasn't figured it out yet. Something turned over gently in the room, and neither of them named it, because it was too new and they were too tired, and some things you do not rush. He drove home in the morning light and let himself into the quiet house. Eli was up, watching cartoons with a bowl of cereal balanced on his knee, and he ran at Marcus and hit him at the waist like a small truck. You went back to the glass, Eli said. I did. I told my teacher my dad fixes the machines nobody else can fix. Eli said it like a plain fact, not a boast. Was that okay to say? Marcus had spent a week being told, in front of everyone, that he was replaceable. His son had never believed it, not for a single second, and had gone and told his second-grade teacher so. Yeah, bud, Marcus said, and his voice came out rougher than he meant it to. That was okay to say. Eli had made him a drawing while he was gone. It was Dad, a stick figure with big hands, standing next to a tall orange scribble that was clearly the furnace, and a little glass bottle floating in the corner with a smile on it. Marcus pinned it to the refrigerator next to the photograph of Beth, where the boy would see both of them every morning. Warren called Marcus into his office the following week, and this time the box on the desk was gone, and Warren stood up when Marcus came in. I mistook a credential for competence, Warren said. He was not a man who apologized easily, and it cost him to say it, and Marcus respected that it cost him. It won't happen twice. I don't want to just hire you back, Marcus. That's not enough, and we both know it. He offered a real title, one that meant something, and a raise that Claire had clearly fought for, and authority over training the next generation of the floor, and the freedom to write the knowledge down in his own way, at his own pace, so that when Marcus Doyle finally retired in 20 or 30 years, the furnace would still have someone who could hear it. Put me where I can teach it, Marcus said, and I'll stay. But I want Trevor on the floor, not fired, on the floor, swabbing molds, learning the flat note. If he's going to have anything to say about this plant someday, he's going to earn the right to say it. Warren almost smiled. You want to punish him. No, Marcus said. I want to give him what nobody gave him. A reason to respect the work. Punishing him would be easy. This is better. Warren looked at him for a long moment, and something in the old man's face eased, as if he had been handed back a piece of himself he had misplaced. "You know," he said, "my father started this plant sweeping the cold end, same as you. Somewhere along the way, we got to thinking the people in the offices were the ones who ran it. I forgot who actually keeps the fire honest." He put out his hand. "I won't forget again." Marcus shook it. There was nothing else to prove, and nothing left to say, and that, more than any title, was what winning had turned out to feel like. Not loud, not a victory over anyone, just the quiet of being seen plainly, at last, for exactly what he was. And so, some weeks later, Trevor Ashby stood on the forming floor in safety glasses and a heat apron, holding a swab, trying and failing to keep a mold from going dry, and he laughed at himself, which was a new sound for him. Marcus corrected him without unkindness, the way the old man had once corrected Marcus, and something in the younger Ashby began, slowly, to change. He started coming in early. Nobody told him to. He just began to understand that the floor gave up its secrets only to people who were already there when it woke. Claire came by with 2 coffees and handed one to Marcus over the rail. "Dinner," she said. "You and Eli. I make a bad lasagna, but I make it with feeling." "That's the only way that counts," Marcus said, and he took the coffee, and their hands touched for a second longer than they needed to, and neither of them minded. On a quiet evening not long after, Marcus took Eli to the fence at the edge of the plant property, the way he sometimes did, and they stood and watched the furnace glow through the tall windows, steady and orange against the coming dark. The line was running. You could hear it from here, the low hum in the ground, the gasp of the machines, the river sound. The whole town slept better beside. Somewhere inside, glass that had been sand a day ago was becoming something a person would one day pick up and hold. They had tried to replace a man with a title. But some things are not held by titles. They are held by hands that learned the work, and by a heart that kept showing up for it, day after day, before dawn, for 18 years. A spreadsheet can measure what a man costs. It cannot measure what he carries. Marcus Doyle had never needed anyone to tell him that he mattered. He had only needed the world to catch up to what his son had known all along. Eli leaned against his father's leg, and Marcus put a hand on the boy's shoulder, and together they watched the light of the furnace hold steady in the dark, keeping the glass honest, the way it always had.